You're listening to another episode of the Just Go Bike podcast, powered by RAGBRAI. This is the award-winning podcast where we are all about the culture of cycling, just for the fun of it. Your hosts are Murph from the Murphology podcast and AP from Parrot Talk. With tales from all over the nation, come for the bikes, stay for the fun, and leave with a smile. And now here is Murph.
Hey, that's me.
And AP.
Hey, that's me.
Well, I would like to welcome everyone to the podcast. Sitting here in Parrot Talk Studios is Mr. Matt Phippen, our RAGBRAI ride director.
Hello.
Dr. Hughes, who is the medical director at MercyOne, am I saying it right, Neurosciences?
Yes.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
And then also we have Kathleen O'Donnell, who is the National Multiple Sclerosis Society leader, president, CEO.
I'm not the CEO. I am the Upper Midwest chapter president.
Upper Midwest chapter president. So welcome everyone to the podcast. And I think it's going to be obvious what our topic today is.
Yes.
Am I correct?
You are correct.
Okay. So Matt, everyone who listens to this podcast has listened to you as we talk about the RAGBRAI route and getting ready for RAGBRAI. But I think it's been a while since you've actually told listeners where you're from and what cycling is like there. So let's kick it off with you.
Yeah, so from Vinton, Iowa, and it is a lot of gravel and paved roads. Some little bit of trail, but for the most part, it's gravel and paved.
And I believe nationally, Vinton has a trail that is not seen very many other places. Is that true?
Yes, we have it's a trail you really can only see at night to get the full effect, but we have a glow trail. It's about a mile, I think, round trip all the way around it, and it's right by my house, so it's pretty cool. But yeah, at night it definitely glows. There's little rocks that throughout the day find the sun and charge, and then it shines at night. So if you're out and about at night, you can definitely see it.
Excellent. And then Dr. Hughes, can you tell us maybe where you call home and if you're into cycling at any level?
Yeah, so very much into cycling, but I was born and raised in Southern California in Anaheim. And then I was recruited to come to Iowa to head a multiple sclerosis research center in Des Moines, Iowa. Mr. Ruan, John Ruan, was a businessman here in town, was very influential in making that happen. And as far as cycling, it's kind of my passion. And RAGBRAI has been, I think this will be my 18th RAGBRAI.
Whoa!
Not consecutive. That it's such a phenomenal, uniquely Iowa experience that I've done rides in other states, and this is the best.
I think that we can agree with that, right, Matt?
I'm partial. I would agree with that. Yeah, for sure.
And then Kathleen, how about you? Where do you call home, and is there any cycling connection for you?
Yes. So I call the Twin Cities in Minnesota home. Great cycling community there, from the grand rounds that were built into the architecture of the city around the chain of lakes to the iconic Willard Munger Trail that goes from Duluth to the cities that we had the first Bike MS ride on, the OG. So as far as myself and cycling, it seems like every year when spring comes, I really want to be a cyclist kind of human who gets out my bike again and realizes how out of shape I am. I do enjoy doing it, though. I enjoy, the social part of it. I haven't competed in anything or done any formal rides. They don't let me ride in the rides that we work because I'm working. So, yeah, it's kind of an aspiration year over year for me.
And I think when we get towards the end of our interview, we want to make sure we touch on, I know there are MS rides that are very important to the whole National Multiple Sclerosis Society.
Sure. Yeah.
So let's get into that. Yeah, at the end.
Yeah, whenever you're ready.
So I will start with Dr. Hughes. Can you give us a short overview of your connection specifically with multiple sclerosis?
Yeah. So when you're in neurology training, you're exposed to a lot of different neurologic disorders. And I get asked this a lot because my subspecialty is multiple sclerosis. That's all I see in clinic. And my partners get to see everything else: epilepsy, stroke, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, that kind of stuff. And I'm commonly asked, like, why did I decide to become, why am I so passionate about multiple sclerosis? And it had nothing, I don't have a family member, there was no specific connection. It's just in training, the condition was one that, unlike most neurologic conditions, which affect people in senescence when they're 60, 70, 80 years old, MS, the average age of diagnosis is 33. So it's a decidedly younger population. I like that younger population. It had different needs. And the condition itself is an autoimmune condition, so a defect in the immune system, which normally does very good things for us, protecting us from viruses and bacteria. In autoimmune conditions like multiple sclerosis, there's a target of a portion of the body that should be thought of as normal, but is recognized as foreign. And in the case of multiple sclerosis, it's the central nervous system, the spinal cord and brain. And the immune system periodically wants to, in an aberrant fashion, attack and destroy parts of the central nervous system, causing deficits.
And then over to Kathleen. Tell us your connection with MS.
Sure. So I work for the National MS Society. I've been with the society for 5.5 years. I have both friends and family members who live with MS. And I always say that I have a ginormous extended family now through the work that I get to do with the society in partnership with people living with MS and their care providers like Dr. Hughes.
And you were, before we push record, you were speaking to, you're in the, I don't know if we want to call it Midwest area.
Yeah.
But your society represents the entire nation.
Yes, that's correct. It's one nonprofit. We have 30 chapters, so there's 30 folks just like me who are chapter presidents. Our Upper Midwest chapters, Minnesota, Iowa, North Dakota, and South Dakota. But our teams really work seamlessly together. People move. There's great networks of supporters, healthcare systems. There was a day when each chapter was a separate nonprofit. And so it was a significant intentional move by the society to align to maximize resources. And it used to be that if your chapter had money, your people got stuff, and if your chapter didn't, your people didn't get that much stuff,
sure.
right? So now I always say we have people biking in New York for people living in Iowa. All of our resources go to everyone, and we specifically try to focus on areas where there are gaps. So
that's, that was an important step, because if
Absolutely.
I'm in rural North Dakota, funds or availability might not be the same as if I'm in a major, even in the Twin Cities.
That's right on. That's exactly right. So it was, in addition to just kind of cutting away with a lot of the additional funds that get spent on accounting and that, it really did provide equitable service for everyone. And I'm proud of the work that we do. I love my chapter presidents. We're kind of a big extended family, and we make sure people get taken care of no matter where they are.
And then do you two, Dr. Hughes and Kathleen, do you work together at any level?
Yes, quite a bit. In fact, she was just here last week.
Oh.
Because on a whole bunch of different levels, from fundraising. So I do a lot of fundraising for organizations so that they can provide services that aren't necessarily covered by insurance. And with the National MS Society, they have a whole bunch of things that are great. I've been involved with them since basically my inception of coming here in 1995. So this is, in July, it'll be my 30th year here. And the National MS Society has always been a solid resource for patients to get accurate educational information. And not just for the patients, but for caregivers and friends. They hold centers of excellence, so they have they hold us to account is to be that we're providing the best quality care for patients living with multiple sclerosis. And every 3 years, is that right?
That's right.
Every 3 years, that's renewed. And there's stringent criteria that have to be met, so it holds our feet to the fire to make sure we're providing the best care possible. So a lot. And the bike ride for their organization to raise money, MS walks, other events.
Yeah, we're really grateful for both Dr. Hughes and his colleagues and for MercyOne and the longstanding relationship. Across the country, we have MS Partners in Care. That's what Dr. Hughes was referring to. And MercyOne just re-upped their certification for that. And that does help people figure out where they can go for service. And I'll just kind of use that as a segue to talk about some of the resources Dr. Hughes was talking about. One of the things that happens with our clinical partners is that they can make referrals to our MS navigators, who are really care partners for either people living with MS or their friends or family, on all kinds of issues, from home modification to do I disclose at work that I live with MS, to I need to know how to talk to my children about MS, to I need to re-up for Medicare. How do I know if my prescriptions are going to be covered? So anyone can access our MS navigators, but that seamless connection through our partners in care is important. A lot of people don't know that we, in addition to funding research and programs and services for people who live with MS, we build the MS workforce by doing professional development and education for healthcare providers anywhere in the system. So that's an important part of the work that we do. We have research fellows, clinical fellows, and that all kind of feeds up into the workforce that Dr. Hughes and others like him lead for excellent care in the field of MS.
And I think that's a good segue over to Matt. When people are listening to this right now thinking, what is MS and RAGBRAI? What's the connection? And I think that there's three things. One is that MS has bike rides that are also fundraisers, and we'll get to that in a second. Also, we have a pretty important program called RAGBRAI Gives, and MS can be part of that. But the biggest reason that we're doing this podcast today is because people may or may not know that Matt, our ride director, is living with MS.
Yeah.
So I don't know what you want to tell us about your story, your journey. Tell us what you'd like to tell us.
Well, sure. We can just dive in. How's that sound? So I had to think about it a little bit because, over the years, the time just all blurs together. So I had to go back and look at pictures and ask my wonderful wife, like, all the facts, because she knows the facts. But I think for me, it started Christmas of 2015. We were at my parents' house. All the kids had gotten done opening presents. And then as adults go, we all get on our phones for social media. And as I'm scrolling, I come across an article of a gentleman that was in a bad spot. He was having life issues and decided that he was drinking way too much. So he decided that he wanted to give up alcohol as a way to try to figure out his life. So I'm sitting there, and obviously I wasn't experiencing life issues. I have a great wife, a great family. I had a great job with Shields at the time. But I thought to myself, could I give up alcohol for a year or for good? And I remember getting up, I walked over to my mom's counter, and I dumped a 6-pack of craft beer down the drain. And for the rest of the night, I just sat there and kind of just enjoyed everything. And it took probably a month before my wife started to notice there was no alcohol in the house anymore. And she just asked, like, hey, you're not drinking a whole lot. Like, what's going on there? And I said, well, I read this article, and I'm going to take a year off of drinking alcohol. With Shields and with what I was teaching, I created a 365 challenge. I think we may have talked about this. And I had all my sales leaders in sales meetings in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I pitched this idea of, here's what I'm doing. I challenge you to find something for the next year that you can challenge yourself with, or give up, or attack, that to prove to yourself that this is a possibility. And mine is going to be alcohol. We had people that gave up, candy and some of these other things, but for my year, this is going to be my goal. And it started off good. I mean, it was cold outside, nothing was happening, and then cycling starts to pick up, and beer is a huge thing in the cycling community. We were building trails, so it was one of those things where after the trail meeting, was cracking beers to celebrate the wins of the trail. And then, it was pre-ride, and I wasn't drinking on pre-ride. And then, RAGBRAI came and went, and I wasn't drinking there. But then, there was a Sunday morning, I got up, got ready for work. I had a closed shift at the store. I hopped out of the shower, and I looked at the mirror, and I had a light, thing with my eye where it felt like I stared at the sun a little bit too long. I got kind of glossy, and I kind of lost the vision in the eye for a little bit. And I was blinking and trying to make it go away, and it got better, but it just didn't go away. So I went to work that day and drove to Coralville, and as I'm driving, it was kind of getting worse, and it was getting more hazy. And I told my guys I'm going to run across the street to the Pearl Vision. That's the only place that was open on a Sunday. And I said, I know they have a person there. I'm going to have them look at my eyes. So I sat down with an eye doctor, and they said, man, your eyes look great. But I think what happened was a floater broke off and got caught in your optic nerve. And I said, okay, so when does that go away? And it's like, well, we don't know, just, a matter of time. So I ended up going back to work, and just throughout the day, it just, it was just awkward. It felt weird. I just wasn't myself. So I left for the day, went home, and scheduled an appointment with my hometown doctor, and did the same thing. Looked at my eye, and he said everything looked great, but let me refer you to a specialist, an eye specialist out of Cedar Rapids. So I went to Cedar Rapids, talked to an eye specialist. I was in a room, or multiple rooms for over an hour, dark, all these different tests were thrown at me. And he came to a conclusion that it was optic neuritis. And I said, okay, well, what does that mean? And he's explaining it to me, but he goes, you know what? I want you to go see somebody else. And, at the time, I've heard of MS. It was never really brought up about what the next step was, but they just said, there's a doctor in Iowa City that specializes in some of these things. We want you to get in with him and just rule out that it's this. We think it may be this, but we just want to rule it out. So it was like 4 or 5 months later of this appointment, because clearly you guys are booked up a lot. So I'm okay. Sounds good. They threw out the word MS, and I'm like, trying not to dive down this rabbit hole of my life's, like, this is where my life is going. So I just basically said, okay, I'm just going to continue to do what I'm doing and figure it out. And over time, my eye got better, but I started to have tingling in my 2 fingers and my thumb. And I thought, okay, this is kind of weird. Maybe I slept on my arm wrong. Maybe it was like, just some wacky thing. But I called the U of I and talked to the nurse of the doctor. And I said, hey, I have an appointment on this date. I'm experiencing this. I was told to call if anything changed in my body. And can I get in any sooner? And being very sweet, she said, no, I apologize. He is booked out. If anything would open up, like, we'll let you know. So went back to living life, and a month later, the tingling was still there, and I felt tingling throughout my arm now. So I called back and I said, hey, it's Matt again. I called you about a couple weeks ago. It's now feeling like it's moving up my arm. Just want to give you the heads up. Is there any openings? And no, I apologize that there isn't anything. So I said, okay. So continue to live my life. And then I woke up one morning, and now my ear is tingling. Oh. And the side of my neck was tingling a little bit. And it would kind of come and go, but it was just, I'm now being, now aware of it. So I called back and I said, hey, this is Matt again. I'm now having tingling in my ear. Is there any openings? And she said, let me call you right back. So I feel like we're making progress now. And, got a call back, and it was from the doctor, and he said, hey, I have an opening on this time on this date. Can you be here? And I said, absolutely. So my wife and I drove to Iowa City on that date and went to the U of I, went to a room. Dr. Kamholtz came in, and, if I can describe him, older gentleman, and this leather, I don't know what you would call it, briefcase, but doctor's bag, old school, like been around for a while. Gets set down. I went like, oh shit, like look, this is going to get legit now. And he opens it up. He's having small talk conversation, and I'm doing tests, and he's touching me and making my my body do things, and I'm walking, and I'm following his finger and all these things. And then he says, I believe you have MS. And at the time it was, I didn't question him because he had the proven doctor bag. He looked the part, he dressed the part. I didn't know truly what it was, but I just felt a calming feeling that, okay,
Like, here's an answer.
here's my answer. Now what do I do? And I remember looking at my wife, and you could tell she had a different level of feeling going through her body than I did. And, you know, still at that point, I had no idea what it was. And he started talking to, you know, through the process and what we need to look at. And, you know, he said, you know, if you question, you know, my decision, there's a spinal tap that we can put you through. But he goes, I wouldn't recommend that. And like, yeah, there's no chance I want to deal with that. So I said, well, what's the next step? He said, we want you to come back on Monday, and we're going to basically pump a steroid into you to see if we can do this. And so I, you know, obviously went home. I remember the car drive home was quieter than normal, because we're like, obviously my wife's trying to process life, and I'm trying to figure out what's going on too. And went back on Monday and, you know, checked in, and I sat in a room that was visible to people walking by. And I had this line in my arm and had really no idea what was getting pumped into my body. I'm just there for the ride and to figure out what's going on. But I remember vividly was a very, very small young girl walked by my room, and she had no hair, and she had a mask on, and she was hooked up to something, and she just pulled her mask down. She smiled. And for me, it was like, she's dealing with something far worse than I got going. So I can figure this out. So I, you know, started asking some more questions and, you know, got going, and the steroid helped for a little bit. I mean, I still have tingling. You see me play with my hand every once in a while when it starts to tingle, but, you know, I've now, so that was 2015, diagnosed in, I think, 16, and then been doing the process and doing all the stuff. Had the MRIs, lesions on the brain, lesions on the spine, you know, all the things that are a part of this disease, and feel that, you know, I'm in a good spot from the standpoint of I still function like I function. You know, my biggest thing is I'm tired, which, you know, I work hard. So I tell myself I work hard, or I ride my bike really hard. This is why I'm tired that night. But I think the shitty part for me is, you know, my girls are at a point now where they understand what's going on, but there's just times where I like staying home, and I like just like being around the house, because, you know, it's hard sometimes after a long week to feel like I want to show up for them, but it's difficult because I'm tired, you know, and I don't want them to look at it and go, well, Dad's on the couch again taking a nap because, you know, lazy bum, whatever it is. And it's not that. It's just there's times I just need that little bit of a rest. So I try to do as much as I can, you know, with them, and, you know, with this with my job here, and, you know, the last 4 years has been great because I get to be more present as a dad and show up and be a part of their games and do that. But, you know, that's where I found my new doctor from the standpoint of I was going to the University of Iowa. I had a person down there, obviously changed roles now in Des Moines. Like to find something closer here. And it was just, you know, 2 years ago, we were at our route announcement party, and this gentleman and a table bid on the bike that Dream Team got the funds for. And through a connection, I found out who he was and what he did. And I remember, like, I reached out and said, hey, I want you to be my doctor. And I think at the time you weren't taking any new patients. So I was very appreciative that you said yes. And
we are referring to Dr. Hughes, who's sitting right next to me.
Yep. And I think, you know, part of it was, and I hate saying this out loud, but, you know, the University of Iowa, because it's so big, I felt that I was just a number. And I get that there's people that are trying to be the next doctor, but I would go there, and you would do a check-in, and then you would talk to someone and answer all these questions, and then you go to the next person and answer the same questions. And then if you got to the doctor the third time, it was great, but it just felt like there wasn't this process. And after meeting this gentleman and going through, you know, changing, I felt like we're on the same level. It's quick, it's easy. I feel that because he is a cyclist, he's already a good guy. And, you know, so what he says, I agree with it, and we do. And, you know, I went from taking 2 pills a day and a third pill for for me being tired, to going to infusions. So I had a 6-hour infusion one day and a 2-hour infusion. And, now it's every 6 months. So we're good that way. But, you still ride your bicycle as much as I can, and I probably should ride more, but so this is something that obviously I live with. It's not going anywhere right now, so maybe one day it'll go somewhere, but I'm truly very lucky to have the symptoms that I have, and I feel it's easily manageable, because there's obviously people that deal with it for a lot worse reasons than on their day in and day out. So I am blessed to know that I have this, but like it could change. So I'm preparing for what my future looks like, because I don't know what it is, but
Sure.
I think I'm in good hands. So we'll just, whatever he tells me to do, we're going to do, and we're going to figure it out. So that's my fast forward kind of story.
And I do want to ask Dr. Hughes about medical improvements, maybe that you've seen over the years. But before that, I just want to, this is just a personal observation of knowing people with MS. It seems like the quality of life is different for each person with MS. And I don't know if, Kathleen, you want to speak to that, or
Sure.
tell us kind of what does that mean?
Sure, I can give a layman's version of that, and Dr. Hughes can certainly expound on that. They say if you know one person with MS, you know one person with MS. MS really does manifest differently in different people. There are at least four, Dr. Hughes probably knows about more iterations of that kinds of MS that are different. There's progressive MS, there's relapsing remitting MS, there's secondary progressive MS. So I think that it is important that we increase awareness and understanding, and realize that that MS is different for different people. And so I know this is airing during MS Awareness Week, and that's why that's so important to us, to help people understand the disease and learn more. And because there are different kinds of MS, there are different kinds of treatments for MS, which I'll defer to Dr. Hughes on. But I will say the National MS Society has had something to do with every single one of those treatments that are now available. Back in the 90s, there was one, and now there's over 25.
Oh, wow.
And that type of expertise to decide on the right treatment for the right person at the right point in time is exactly why we need exceptional neurologists and MS specialists like Dr. Hughes.
And you mentioned briefly, which is back to my question I was going to ask you, Dr. Hughes, is obviously you've seen medical improvements throughout the years, but do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, so I think we talk and we kind of pat ourselves on the back for the pharmacologic advances, the prescription medications that treat multiple sclerosis, and they unquestionably have been a game changer. But we're also advancing in our knowledge on other things. That's just taking the prescription isn't going to be the best way to address your multiple sclerosis. We were talking about everyone being their own little snowflake. It's not the same in different individuals, and you really have to tailor it to that individual. Some people are extremely risk averse. Some people are not. It's figuring out the individual, and then coming up with kind of the holistic approach to how best to manage their cases. When we were talking about education and through the MS Society and having their medical board give you accurate information that is up to date, because I tell people, when I have a newly diagnosed patient with multiple sclerosis, you need to read up-to-date information. If you're reading information that is 5 or 10 years old in multiple sclerosis, it's dated. If it is greater than 10 years old, it's archaic. It's not germane to you whatsoever. So education helps alleviate fears and worries. We should all have concerns. And then we come up with our best medication approach, but then also tie in the other aspects that we know are so important. And this is where, of course, I'm biased because I'm a cyclist. And I'll tell you, it's been great to partner with different groups in the state of Iowa, in different facilities that will build three-wheeled cycles for people, because then we get to be outdoors. Iowa has phenomenal trail system. It is just, and I'm biased because I'm in Des Moines, but I think the trail system here is amongst the best anywhere. And for them to be able to get out and get with nature, get exercise is great. So there's the balance aspect, right? Some people can do two-wheel, some people require three-wheel from a balance aspect, but revolutionary has been the e-bikes, and that, because patients, even if their balance is good, would always worry that I'm going to get somewhere and then my energy level is going to be zapped and I won't be able to get home. And so now they can have the exercise and not the fear that they're not going to be able to get back. And that has decidedly increased the number of patients that will exercise. And it's not just for the physical aspect of exercise that's good. It helps modulate the immune system and keep it from being overly active. So it's a definite, that exercise, just like healthy diet, mindfulness, is a decided adjunct to whatever pharmacologic treatment you're looking at treating your MS.
So one of the big areas of research that the National MS Society is investing in is around lifestyle, exercise, diet. What are those things that can help people manage their MS and even in some cases restore lost function?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, to piggyback onto that, here we have all these people listening who either ride bikes or are hoping to ride bikes. And there may be people out there that actually are connected to MS, whether they have MS or they know somebody. So what can they do?
Yeah, boy, that is a great question. I think I'll start with bike aficionados or wannabes like me.
Oh, and I will tell you, like on social media, I see it all the time where I've done quite a few bike MS events.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why it shows up on my feed. Or maybe it's because I love biking. But I see bike MS, I see walk MS. And recently I saw pickleball MS.
That's awesome.
I didn't mean to interrupt, but speak to that. I mean,
I will.
If I'm somebody who loves biking or walking or running or whatever.
Yes. And thank you for your past participation. So the Society hosts a lot of events, like our Bike MS series. We have 50 rides across the country. And this year alone, we'll probably raise $53 million through those bikes.
Wow.
Bike rides, we've raised over $1.5 billion just through the Bike MS series over the years. The cool thing about our Bike MS rides, people can just go to bikems.org, put in their zip code or their city, and it says find your ride. The cool thing about that is that they're all kind of thematically a little different. Mm-hmm. We have one called Waves to Wine. We have one called Jack and Back that goes to the Jack Daniels Distillery.
Oh, there we go.
We have 3 here in our chapter in Minnesota. We have a Twin Cities ride. We have the first ever Bike MS ride, the OG, which was the MS 150 from Duluth down to the Twin Cities. It's a 2-day ride. And then we have a 5-day ride that falls around the same time as RAGBRAI. But people don't have to go on one of our bike rides, right? As you mentioned, we have our Walk MS. Same thing, walkms.org. Put in your zip code, find your walk. We also have walks that communities put on themselves. It's called Walk MS Your Way. So we have little walks, and they're not huge walks. We do have a challenge walk that's like a 50-mile, 3-day thing, but these walks can be around the block or around the park. We also do have a whole series of events that people in the community host called DIYs, probably like the pickleball that you saw, people raising funds. We have people do what they want to do in their communities. We have a great group that's about 20 years in now doing bouldering, where they ride in 4-wheelers and Jeeps over boulders and mud. In Gilbert, Minnesota, to raise funds for MS. So you can get involved in any way you want. And I think if you go to our website, you can also look up best practices and suggestions and resources around that are vetted, like Dr. Hughes said, research-based around lifestyle, exercise. We also can get you connected, if you call one of our MS navigators, to specific MS-related programs. One of my colleagues, there's a partner of theirs at the Society that is a gym that's just for people who live with MS to do specific kinds of exercises that help. So, lots of ways to get involved, as well as get out there and get active.
And so you're saying $53 million may be coming in, with all of these events.
Oh, that's just the bike events.
Oh, that's just the bike event.
That's just the bike events.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I don't recall if we were recording yet or if you were just speaking about it, but one of the things that you mentioned was the navigators.
Yes.
So Is that something that if I know somebody who has MS, do they have to pay for that resource? So that is that part of the $53 million?
Yeah, that's where the money goes. Our mission says we will cure MS while empowering people affected by MS to live their best lives. And our navigators are just one of the ways we do that. Either if you live with MS yourself or know someone or are a caregiver, you can go to our website or call and make an appointment with an MS navigator who can really get to know you well, figure out what you need. Maybe there are things you didn't know you needed that through growing in a relationship with them, they can help you connect with as a kind of a partner in your journey over time. All of that is free.
Well, I think that's a good segue into RAGBRAI Gives. And Matt, do you want to kind of tell the listeners a little bit about what RAGBRAI Gives is and maybe any connection that it maybe has to MS?
Sure. So we started RAGBRAI Gives, I want to say it's 2+ years ago. And it was a way for riders to register for the ride and then donate to the towns, the overnight towns that we were going to. And then, riders were, through registration, basically raising money on behalf of the towns. Before we even started, the riders didn't know the towns yet, but they were already starting to give. And then once they found out, then obviously they gave more. And then we divided that up, equally across the state. Now, switch gears to this year, Honor Flight's going to be our give back. So now riders can go on, register for RAGBRAI, and then give back to that charity. And I think that's kind of just blown up this year. So super excited to see where that number ends. And then that number will basically be divided between all the Iowa hubs that they have. So it equally be kind of, split up across the state.
How can people be a part of RAGBRAI Gives?
Obviously, when you register, you can give money directly back to Honor Flight. And that's kind of that is our give back this year, something that we're super excited to be a part of. But I Ride for a Day is about truly whatever you want to ride for. So if there is a charity that you're riding for, so if it is MS, you can find the MS website and give back directly to them and support them. There are, different groups that will be riding RAGBRAI that will be on part, and they have their own kind of funding pages too, so you can find those online.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited, Matt, about all the people that ride in RAGBRAI and raise money for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society and other MS-related causes. We have quite a few folks that do that. So I would say to people who are out on the ride, much like Matt shared that people looked for him and shared their stories, look for people who are wearing a Bike MS jersey. That jersey is a really powerful thing. I just want to add that. One of my friends had shared with me when I was considering joining the staff of the MS Society how powerful it was to see a jersey that says I ride with MS. It's a sign of hope and persistence and community that is, it just really gets you right at your core.
And I think to, what Dr. Hughes was speaking of, things are changing. And, like you said, Dr. Hughes, 10 years ago, the technology and the history and all the stuff that was happening with MS is obsolete. And it's so nice to see that, because of your society, because of education and changes that are happening, things are, is progressing the right word? I don't know what the right word there is.
I think we're accelerating our progress.
Accelerating,
yeah,
yes.
For sure. And I would say there's been more research done in the past 5 years than in the previous 70 that the society has existed.
Oh, wow.
For your international listeners, the National MS Society is a part of international federations and global consensus we've led for what are the most promising pathways to cures and how do we facilitate international collaboration so we can get there faster. For people that are research geeks or just curious minds, there's another podcast that I would recommend called Real Talk MS, where one of our longtime volunteers, John Strum, breaks down the latest in research into layman's terms so that people can stay on top of what are we learning. And the more we learn, the more we can early detect and early intervene. That's where the key is for slowing progression. And that's why weeks like MS Awareness Week or MS Awareness Month are so important, is for people, just the average human, to have that knowledge about MS. There's almost 1 million people in the United States who live with MS.
Wow.
And many people you would not know they live with MS unless they disclose that to you. And there's still some concerns around disclosing that you live with MS, that people are going to treat you differently, that they're going to think you can't do X, Y, and Z. And so being aware of that, not only to be sensitive as a fellow citizen, but also to help if there are symptoms. And so not to delay early detection and intervention. That's really important.
Well, before we wrap it up, will you tell the listeners one more time that website and, any other resources you want to share?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So nationalmssociety.org. When you get there, it'll say what brings you here today. So our website is pretty nimble and user-friendly and helping you find what you need. And you'll see right away it'll pop up and say, do you want to connect with a navigator, which you can do by phone, you can do by chat. They're real humans. It's not a chat bot. And you can make an appointment to see a navigator. But a lot of our resources are standalone, right? You'll see resources for people who are newly diagnosed. It's called Navigating Your MS Journey. It is a cohort model that we do once a month where people can really be with experienced others who have been newly diagnosed and are in that state of overwhelm and needing support, goes through all of the parts of the journey and then sets you up with a virtual cohort of people if you want to be a part of that. We have monthly Ask an MS Expert series that are all recorded, so we have just a huge amount of resources and past recordings around specific topics. We have a new one for veterans. There's a high percentage of veterans. There's over 70,000 veterans in the United States who live with MS that is service-induced. And so we have a special series for them. We have Ask an MS Expert in Spanish. We have a Black MS Experience Summit, what it's like to be a person of color who's living with MS when people maybe think that maybe African-American people, Black people don't get MS, right? A Hispanic Latinx MS Experience Summit. So you'll see gateways to all those resources when you come to our website. And as I said, some are standalone and some are you can get to them by asking a navigator. So it's really meant to be what you need when you need it 24/7.
And that's nationalmssociety.org.
That is correct.
And then, of course, if you maybe don't need the MS resources at this point in your life, but you want to ride your bike for MS.
Yeah.
What's that website?
Bikems.org.
Let's do it.
And you can also get through the International MS or the National MS Society. Same with walkms.org. I would also say for people to follow the National MS Society on whatever social media channel you use.
Yes.
There'll be a lot coming out during this week of MS Awareness Week to really ground you in what is the experience of living with MS. How people don't want to be defined by their MS. And so I would say if you follow us, repost and share. That's an important way to be a part of the mission, is helping to spread awareness.
And we will include quite a few links in our show notes in case you didn't get a chance to write it down.
Yeah, that'll be great. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank Matt for his candor and sharing his story.
Yeah,
which is it's a important thing, but it's also a very precious thing to do, and to be there for others. And I think that for me, that's kind of the main message of MS Awareness Week is how can we be there for one another.
I love it. So I think it's important to know that that website is full of resources, whether you are just discovering you have MS, whether you found out a friend of yours have MS, or if you're just curious about how you can benefit others.
That's correct. And I think when people say, why am I here today, it will help you figure out how to get to the right place. But people shouldn't hesitate to call and talk to real humans, too. I think that's why our navigators are so powerful. And we have people ready to assist people with what they need and get to know them and stay with them on the journey.
Well, this has been an amazing hour. Matt, thank you so much for sharing your story and taking the time to talk to all of us.
No problem.
And of course, Dr. Hughes, thank you very much for being here.
Great.
And then Kathleen, we appreciate you coming from the Twin Cities to Des Moines, Iowa, to just share all that, all the things that you do for MS.
Well, that you is a big we, a big royal we, and I'm grateful that we can be here for people. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, listeners, that is it for today. We want to thank you for tuning in to listen to the Just Go Bike podcast. If you would like to contact Murph and AP with a comment about the podcast, or maybe even you have a topic in mind, you can reach us at justgobikepodcast@gmail.com. Please follow us on Instagram and Facebook and watch our intros on YouTube. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, especially if you're a fan. That is going to do it for this week. Until next time, just go bike! Theme song by Ryan Steer, logo by Suzanne Milosevic, produced by Kathy Murphy, social media by Andrea Parrott, intro by Pumpkin. Until next time, just go bike.